Hello and welcome to the Pod Like a Pro podcast. This is the podcast that gives you tips, tricks and personal experiences to help you to podcast like a professional. I'm Nat Little from Pod and Pen Productions, and I'd like to acknowledge the storytelling traditions of the Awabakal people, the traditional custodians of the land on which I'm recording this episode on. This time on the pod, you're hearing the podcasting personal experience of a winner. Carter won Parenting Podcast of the Year at the 2024 Australian Podcasting Awards for Touched Out, which is a mental health podcast for parents, and it explores the intersection of mental health and parenthood. Hello, Carter.
Hi, how you going, Nate?
Great. Congratulations on the win. What does it mean for you to win the award?
Oh, God, so much. I've said a couple of times to a couple of people that if I didn't have the award and I didn't have photos of the night, it would feel like a fever dream. One of the highest honours and best achievements of my life to date, yeah.
Why, without the documentary evidence, and I was there, so I can, I can confirm that you did win, why would it feel like a fever dream for you?
I've never really won anything, mate. I've always kind of been the underdog that doesn't make it through, you know. Or if I do kind of win anything, it's a group effort. It's not just solo. So this is the first time that I've ever kind of, been recognised or won something for something that me, myself and I have done. So it's pretty awesome.
Why did you want to make the podcast?
I'm a father, obviously, of three. The podcast wouldn't exist without being a dad. But my son was diagnosed with global developmental delay and autism at the age of 2. Shortly after that, I was diagnosed with ADHD. And then shortly after that, I was also diagnosed with autism at the age of 35. So we saw a lot of the kind of markers that were in my son. We saw a lot of those same traits in me. And my wife was like, oh, okay, that's interesting. It's something that because we weren't educated on previously, didn't ever pick up. So after that happened, I went searching for podcasts about being a parent who is on the spectrum, and I really couldn't find much. There was maybe an episode here or there, but nothing that was super targeted and nothing that I found overly insightful. So I said to my wife one day, I want to start a podcast, and I want it to be about being a parent on the spectrum. So, I went back and forth a lot on what I wanted to do, and I thought maybe that's a little too niche, and I wanted to broaden it to mental health as a whole. And then, the birth of Touched Out happened. Did you do it to fill a niche, or were you doing it to find the information and the personal experiences that you were looking for in the content that you searched for but wasn't there? I decided that I wanted to hear other people's stories, other parents' stories, whether it be that they're neurodivergent or not, whether it be just that, they've had an incredibly rough life growing up, and I wanted to hear how they dealt with their lifehood traumas and everything, and then how that kind of molded and shaped them in parenthood and what they were doing different in their own parenting journey to ensure that their children don't have to have those same experiences as them.
How quickly did you find your audience?
It's still growing, but I already had a little bit of a presence online, which helped. So my first episode was with someone named Kate, who was actually a friend of mine, and I already knew that her story was pretty out there and pretty wild, and I knew that that's something that I wanted to hear more about. And then, I put some posts up on Instagram, and I got a handful of people that wanted to come on the pod as guests, and then, word of mouth from them being guests and their friends wanting to listen to their stories. It kind of grew from there.
Let's listen to a bit of the podcast now from episode 21 with Tara talking about her experience with postnatal depression.
So it took 15 years for me to actually agree to take medication, and it changed my life, absolutely changed my life. I can remember within 2 weeks of taking that medication, feeling that attachment to River and be like, this is what it was supposed to be like. This is what it's supposed to feel like.
It sounds like you've just been living for so long in this like emotional, complete burnout that
Yeah.
you'd adjusted to living that way. And that's a really, really dark place to exist.
Yeah.
I've been there, especially with those first few months and the intrusive thoughts that come along with sleep deprivation.
Listening to the podcast, Carter, there's a real honesty and a real rawness from both you and the guests. How important is that no BS attitude and style to the content that you're making?
I don't even think about the content when I'm recording it. I don't think about the episode. It's me just being engrossed in the conversation with someone, learning about their experiences, really, really taking it in. It translates to this deep honesty and this authenticity that I think has really, really helped the podcast in finding that audience. You know, they can tell that I'm not just ticking boxes and ticking questions. It's stuff that I want to hear, and it's stuff that I want to talk about. And it's stuff that, I am incredibly honored for my guests to share, and the fact that they trust me in sharing those stories with the audience is truly special.
How important is it for you to do the interview as a conversation as opposed to a question and answer kind of format?
I think it's very important. I don't think it would translate too well as question and answer. What I do when I have guests on is they fill out a form beforehand and they give me kind of a brief rundown of what their experiences are and the things that they wish to talk about. From there, I'll write some questions that I think would be good to ask in case the conversation, hits a roadblock or anything like that. But for the most part, 90% of the time, it's just this fluid conversation. I ask questions off the top of my head. And if it was just me asking questions and them answering, it would feel a little more clinical. And that's a lot of the podcasts that I found about mental health and parenting were by professionals, by psychiatrists, psychologists, mental health practitioners, things like that. And that's not what I was after. I was after real stories, real people, real conversation.
How powerful do you think that lived experience aspect is when people are searching for information on things such as mental health and parenting?
Incredibly important. Lived experience is, in the spotlight at the moment in society, especially in Australia with mental health. It's about finding connection. It's about finding community. And through that community and through that lived experience, we can heal together. It's like, the old saying, a problem shared is a problem halved, or a burden shared is a burden halved. That the massive boulder, the massive weight that you're carrying uphill in your own mental health journey, just finding someone or listening to an episode of the podcast that resonates with you and you kind of feeling less alone in that dark room, all of a sudden that weight's halved because you've got someone else in this world that is going through or has gone through the same kind of experience as you.
Why do you think podcasting has the power to not only build an audience but also build a community?
I think compared to traditional media, TV, radio, things like that, was so inaccessible. You had to be someone to get on those types of shows. Whereas my podcast, I haven't had professionals on specifically for that reason. I mean, I've had guests who happen to be psychotherapists, things like that, but they were on the podcast first and foremost as parents. So I've been able to get this pretty wide spectrum of information from a lot of different people from different walks of life. And the one commonality we have is that mental health is a universal language. It doesn't matter where you're from. It doesn't matter what your past is. It doesn't matter if, you've up until the age of 40 have had an absolutely brilliant life and all of a sudden you find yourself with depression or anxiety or something like that. These diagnoses or these experiences and traumas have this incredible way of just forming such a tight-knit bond. And these conversations are so incredibly important to have, especially in today's day and age. Mental health was always seen as a taboo thing. You're not supposed to talk about it, especially in men. We talk about men shouldn't show their emotions, and that whole toxic masculinity aspect of how a lot of us were raised. I know I was raised that way. Is, rub some dirt in it. Don't ever let them see you cry. Don't show them your cards. Don't be vulnerable. Harden up.
Harden up.
And it took me a long, long time to unlearn all of that, and that was a real big point of shame for me, especially in my neurodiversity, because obviously I am prone to becoming heightened or overwhelmed a little bit easier than someone who was considered neurotypical. So whenever I felt big feelings, I bottled them up and pushed them down. It hurt me more. So now, I wear it as a badge of honor. I cry in front of my kids. I talk to them about my feelings. They will grow up knowing that they are allowed to cry. Not only are they allowed to, but it's a good thing to cry. It's a good thing to feel. It's a good thing to own your emotions.
Yeah, definitely. And it's such a release as well when you actually do it.
Yeah.
How did you go about starting a podcast from after that moment when you realized that you needed to start one?
Yeah, so I kind of took it in bits and pieces. First of all, I brainstormed and the name for a podcast. And I was like, what would be a good fit? And touched out. To be touched out in itself is a term that's becoming more popular in, parenting and also in the neurodivergent community. To be touched out is to be overwhelmed by touch. And when you're in the trenches with a newborn baby and 2 toddlers and they're hanging off you 24/7, being touched out is a real thing, and it can be incredibly overwhelming. So I thought that was a pretty perfect name. From there, I kind of started mucking around on Canva, trying to come up with some podcast art and all of that. And then, reached out to a friend. I already had a little mixer and a microphone and headphones that my best mate bought me during COVID lockdown to just record some cover songs to pass the time. So I had all of the equipment I needed. I had the name. I had a rough bit of podcast art, which has changed over the almost 2 years several times. And then, I just set up a Zoom recording with a friend of mine. And then went from there. I taught myself how to use Audacity. I taught myself how to edit. I taught myself how to use, things like Riverside and utilizing AI for some of the legwork when I can or when I need to, when I don't have the time or when I'm feeling too overwhelmed. I can lean on that type of stuff to create a bit more of an easier workflow.
Now, Carter, do you have any tips for people who are thinking of starting a podcast from what you learned?
Find what you love and let it destroy you.
Let it destroy you.
Yeah. When I first started out, I read the statistic that 90% of podcasts in the world don't make it past 5 episodes. And I think it's because people focus too much on the podcast itself and not on the topic. If you want to start a podcast, you need to love the topic that you want to focus on. You need to let it destroy you, because people can hear that. People can hear the authenticity. They can hear how passionate you are about these things. And that is what will lead to people wanting to listen to your podcast, because they can tell this person cares about the same thing that I care about, not this person's talking at me about something that I care about.
Because you really can't fake that. You really can't fake a passion or a commitment to something deeply, because people can read it. They've got good lie detectors. So that's a great tip.
And if you're trying to fake it, you're not going to make it past 5 episodes.
Carter, thank you so much for being on the Pod Like a Pro podcast.
Thank you so much for having me, mate.
And to find out more how we can help you to podcast, go to podandpen.com.au, where you can sign up to our newsletter and also check out our Pod Like a Pro course. And until next time, happy listening.